The question had been burning inside Mike Tyson for months. Here he was, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world at just 20 years old, the youngest man ever to hold the title, destroying opponents with a ferocity the boxing world had never seen. Yet every night, one question haunted him: could Muhammad Ali have beaten me? On a rainy Thursday afternoon in November 1987, that question would finally be answered. Not in a boxing ring, but in a quiet hospital room where Muhammad Ali, now 45 and battling the early stages of Parkinson's disease, would deliver 6 words that would shatter the invincible facade of the baddest man on earth, and leave Iron Mike sobbing for 10 straight minutes. This is the untold story of the most emotional moment in heavyweight boxing history, the day Mike Tyson's heart broke, not from a punch, but from the profound wisdom of the man he desperately wanted to measure himself against. If stories about the human side of legends move you, subscribe for more incredible moments that show even the strongest among us need guidance, hope, and sometimes just the right words to heal their souls. November 12, 1987. Mike Tyson was at the absolute peak of his physical and psychological dominance. He had just brutally knocked out Tyrell Biggs in 7 rounds, adding another devastating highlight to a career that seemed destined for immortality. At 21 years old, he was 31-0 with 27 knockouts. A force of nature who entered every ring with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. But privately, Tyson was struggling with demons that had nothing to do with boxing. The death of his mentor Cus D'Amato 2 years earlier had left him emotionally adrift, searching for validation and guidance from father figures who seemed to disappear from his life as quickly as they arrived. His marriage to actress Robin Givens was crumbling amid public scandals and bitter accusations. The young man who appeared invincible to the world was slowly falling apart inside. It was during this turbulent period that Tyson received word that Muhammad Ali was in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York, receiving treatment for his advancing Parkinson's symptoms. The news hit Tyson like a physical blow. Here was his childhood idol, the man he had studied on grainy videotapes in Cus D'Amato's gym, the fighter whose poems he could recite from memory, reduced to seeking medical help for a condition that was slowly stealing his legendary grace and speed. Tyson knew he had to visit, not as a publicity stunt, not for the cameras, but because he needed something from Ali that he couldn't get from anyone else in his life. He needed to know if he measured up to greatness. He needed to know if the man he had become was worthy of the legacy he was trying to carry forward. The hospital visit was arranged quietly through mutual friends in the boxing community. Ali, despite his condition, had specifically requested that the meeting be private. No media, no cameras, no one else present except for his wife Lonnie, who would remain in the corner of the room out of respect for what both men seemed to understand would be a deeply personal conversation. When Tyson walked into room 3R14 that Thursday afternoon, he was struck immediately by how small Ali looked in the hospital bed. The man who had once filled any space with his larger than life presence seemed almost fragile. His hands showing the tremor that had become more pronounced over the past year, his voice softer than the booming baritone that had once captivated the world. But Ali's eyes still held that familiar spark, the intelligence, the warmth, and the mischievous humor that had made him beloved far beyond the boxing ring. When he saw Tyson, his face broke into that famous smile, and he gestured for the young champion to come closer. "Iron Mike," Ali said, his voice carrying traces of the old charisma despite its softer tone. "The baddest man on the planet. Come here, champ. Let me look at you." Tyson approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitancy. Here was the man he had worshipped from afar, the fighter whose style he had studied obsessively, whose confidence he had tried to emulate in his own intimidating pre-fight persona. But faced with the reality of Ali's condition, Tyson felt something he rarely experienced: vulnerability. For the first 20 minutes, they talked about boxing, technical aspects of the sport, mutual opponents they had both faced, the evolution of heavyweight fighting since Ali's retirement. Tyson found himself hanging on every word, absorbing wisdom from a man who had mastered not just the physical aspects of boxing, but the psychological warfare that separated good fighters from great ones. But eventually, the conversation reached the moment that Tyson had been both anticipating and dreading. The question that had driven him to make this hospital visit, the doubt that had been eating at him despite his perfect record and devastating knockout power. "Champ," Tyson said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I got to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Ali nodded, his eyes focused intently on the young fighter's face. "Could you beat me?" Tyson asked, the words coming out in a rush. "I mean, if we both fought in our primes, if you were the Ali that fought Frazier and Foreman, and I was the me I am right now, could you beat me?" The room fell silent except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Lonnie Ali looked up from her book, sensing the weight of the question. This wasn't idle speculation. This was a young man desperately seeking validation, trying to understand where he stood in the pantheon of boxing greatness. Ali studied Tyson's face for a long moment, seeing past the intimidating exterior to the insecure young man underneath. He had been where Tyson was, young, undefeated, convinced of his own invincibility, but desperate to prove himself against the legends who had come before. When Ali finally spoke, his words carried the weight of experience, wisdom earned through triumph and defeat, through the heights of global fame and the depths of public exile. "Mike," Ali said, his voice gentle but clear, "I couldn't beat you." Tyson's eyes widened in surprise. This wasn't the answer he had expected. He had prepared himself for Ali to claim he could have won, had even hoped for it in some ways, wanting to hear the confidence that had made Ali great. But this unexpected humility left him speechless. But Ali wasn't finished. "I couldn't beat you, Mike, because I never had what you have." Now Tyson was completely confused. "What do you mean, champ? You had everything. Speed, power, heart, intelligence." Ali shook his head slowly, a sad smile crossing his face. "No, Mike, I never had what you have and I never will." "I don't understand." "You have time?" Ali said, his voice breaking slightly. "You have time that I'll never have again." The words hit Tyson like a physical blow. Suddenly he understood what Ali was saying, but the older fighter continued, his words becoming more emotional with each sentence. "You're 21 years old, Mike. You got maybe 15-20 years left to be great, to grow, to learn, to become something even better than what you are right now. I'm 45 and my time is running out. This disease," Ali gestured to himself with hands that trembled slightly, "this disease is taking away everything that made me who I was. My speech, my movement, my ability to be the Ali that people remember." Tears began to form in Tyson's eyes as the full impact of Ali's words began to sink in. "But you know what the worst part is?" Ali continued, his own voice thick with emotion. "I can't give you what you really came here looking for. You want me to tell you that you're great, that you measure up to the champions who came before you. But that's not something I can give you, Mike. That's something you got to give yourself." Ali leaned forward as much as his condition would allow, his eyes locked on Tyson's face. "You're asking the wrong question, champ. You're asking if I could beat you. But what you should be asking is, what are you going to do with the time you have? How are you going to use those years that I don't have anymore?" That's when the dam burst. Mike Tyson, the man who had never shown weakness in front of another human being, the fighter who had built his reputation on being emotionally impenetrable, began to sob. Not just tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. For 10 minutes, Iron Mike cried like a child. All the pressure he had been carrying, all the fear that he wasn't good enough, all the loneliness that came with being the youngest heavyweight champion in history with no mentor to guide him. It all came pouring out in that hospital room. Ali, despite his own physical limitations, reached out and took Tyson's hand. The gesture was simple, but it conveyed everything that words couldn't: understanding, compassion, and the recognition of one warrior by another. "It's okay, champ," Ali whispered as Tyson continued to cry. "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not know if you're good enough. I felt the same way when I was your age. Every great fighter does." As Tyson's sobs began to subside, Ali continued to speak, his voice taking on the teaching tone that had once guided countless young fighters. "You want to know how you measure up to the greats? It's not about who could beat who in some fantasy fight. It's about what you do when nobody's watching. It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you. It's about whether you use your platform to make the world better or just to make yourself richer." Ali paused, gathering strength for what he needed to say next. "I made a lot of mistakes, Mike. I hurt people with my words. I let my ego make decisions that my heart should have made. I wasted years being angry instead of being grateful. Don't make my mistakes. Don't waste your time." When Tyson finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen from crying, Ali smiled at him with the warmth of a father looking at his son. "You're going to be fine, champ. You're going to be more than fine. But you got to stop trying to be Muhammad Ali. The world already had one of those. The world needs the first Mike Tyson. The two men sat in comfortable silence for several minutes after that, both understanding that something profound had just occurred between them. Tyson had come looking for validation, but he had found something much more valuable: perspective. When Tyson finally left the hospital that evening, he was a changed man. The conversation with Ali hadn't answered his original question about who would win in a hypothetical fight. Instead, it had shown him that he was asking the wrong questions entirely. In the weeks and months that followed, those close to Tyson noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He began speaking more thoughtfully in interviews, showing more respect to his opponents, and demonstrating a humility that hadn't been present before. The cocky young destroyer who had entered that hospital room had emerged as something more complex, a champion who understood that true greatness wasn't measured in knockouts, but in character. Years later, long after Tyson's career had ended, he would speak publicly about that hospital visit for the first time. In interviews, he would describe it as the most important conversation of his life. The moment when he learned that being the baddest man on earth meant nothing if you weren't also a good man. Ali didn't just teach me about boxing that day, Tyson would say. He taught me about life. He taught me that time is the most precious thing any of us have, and that we can't waste it trying to prove we're better than people who came before us. We got to use our time to become the best version of ourselves. The question, could you beat me, was never answered that day in the hospital. But in the 10 minutes that Mike Tyson spent crying in Muhammad Ali's presence, both men found something more valuable than any victory: the understanding that true champions aren't defined by who they can defeat, but by how they choose to live when no one is keeping score. Ali's 6 words, "I couldn't beat you because of time," had cut through all of Tyson's bravado and revealed the scared young man underneath. In that moment of complete vulnerability, Iron Mike had learned that the strongest thing any fighter can do is allow himself to be human. The baddest man on earth had cried for 10 minutes, and in doing so, had become something greater than he had ever been in any boxing rings: a man capable of growth, empathy, and genuine greatness that extended far beyond the sport that had made him famous. Sometimes the most important fights happen outside the ring, and sometimes the greatest victories come from surrendering to the wisdom of those who have walked the path before us. In a quiet hospital room in 1987, two champions discovered that the real measure of greatness isn't how hard you can hit, but how deeply you can feel, learn, and grow from the time you've been given.